and welcome to the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Mike Sarraille. I'm joined by a man I highly respect, excited for this one. I would consider him a mentor, retired Major General Clay Hutmacher, 40, how many years?
Just shy of 41 years, about a month shy. Yeah.
Just shy. You couldn't get to 41, just lack of commitment?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a quitter.
Is it so 41 years of military service. He's currently the president and CEO of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, for which I'm an ambassador. And I'll tell you what, I love this foundation. We'll definitely get into that towards the end. But we're living in a crazy world right now.
Yeah, certainly as crazy as I've seen it during my time. And I thought I saw crazy, but crazy's taken on a new definition these days.
You got to wonder. The World War II vets during Vietnam probably thought the country was up in flames. It ebbs and flows, much like the economy. There's ups, there's downs. But do you think people lose perspective in this country of how good we have it?
Yes, I do. Frankly, I think that for a lot of people, they've known nothing else. So at one level, while what's happening in Ukraine is a tragedy, but seeing the atrocities and seeing what happens out in the world, I think at some level is a good reminder for people of how good we do have it, and how we, those of us that serve, you and I, we understand what the world is like beyond more maybe than most average citizens that live in their own little bubble here. But I think seeing what could happen and is happening out in the world today is a good reminder that we need to be thankful for and committed to protecting what we have in this nation.
Yeah, perspective is a powerful tool, and I'm thankful for deploying so many times across the world and seeing how other people live. So you have an amazing story, and I don't want to say the words. You didn't come from much, but I mean, at 15, you were in a foster home.
Yep.
In Washington. Explain to me a little about how you ended up in that foster home at 15, and then I know you eventually made the way into the Marine Corps. You enlisted, and I'm sure that was impactful in your life. But take me back to Washington in those teen years.
Yeah, my mother and father divorced early on in my life. I'm the youngest of five, and way younger. I'm like 7 years younger than than my brother, the next one up in the chain there. And they divorced, and my mother went overseas. She was a writer, lived in South Africa. And, I was, as a result of the divorce, and, I just was a poorly behaved youth, I would say. And so I bounced around and then ended up living in a foster home. And the family that took me in, who I am still in contact with to this day, the husband was Charlie Williams. He's since passed, but he was a Marine in Korea. And he talked to me. He used to tell me stories about the Marine Corps, and I didn't know what I really needed, other than I needed somebody to put me on the straight and narrow, and I needed to jump in the deep end of the pool. And the Marines seemed like a good choice, and they definitely put me on the straight and narrow. They did not disappoint. From the time I got on those yellow footprints when I got off the bus, I thought I made a horrible mistake.
I don't think anyone on day one thinks they made a great choice. I mean, you don't know what you're stepping into, but the power of Marine recruiting. Yes. I joined because I met a Force Recon Marine. That guy impressed me so much. At my whopping 135 pounds, however much I weighed at 19, I'm like, I want to be that dude.
Yep.
But so, interesting. You said, hey, an unruly kid. That's exactly how my parents would have described me. Mm-hmm. I did find a common thread among some of the highest performers in the military is they were unruly. They just didn't know how to focus. They didn't know how to commit. But once you made that switch and you mentored them, AKA or boot camp, it's like you unleashed a beast. They knew how to take that energy and just focus it on a mission until it was achieved.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think, things could have definitely went a different way for me. There were several forks in the road where either through a good decision on my part or just through fate, I ended up on the right path. But later in life, the things that challenged me earlier in my youth actually became an asset to me later in life. Driven, focused, a bit of a risk taker.
You don't say.
Yeah,
yeah,
just a little. Yeah.
for what you eventually did, the risk is, and I know you guys are good at mitigating risk, but risk was still.
But it's inherent.
It's
right?
inherent in everything we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and what did you do in the Marine Corps?
So in the Marine Corps, I went in on not quite an open contract. I can't remember what it was, but I ended up as an Amtracker, an 1833 amphibious assault vehicle crewman, and I did that for. I went to Camp Lejeune first, then I went to Okinawa, Camp Schwab.
Yeah.
Then I re-enlisted and went to Marine Barracks, Whidbey Island, Washington, which has since closed. And then I got picked up for Army Flight School at that point. I went back, got my high school diploma, started going to college at night. And the Army said, hey, we'll pick you up for flight school. I have my acceptance letter, and the Marine Corps sent me back to Okinawa, so I had to defer a year until I came back from Okinawa, and then I went right to flight school.
Was that a warrant officer program? Or
warrant officer. So I started flight school in '84, graduated in June of '85 as a warrant officer 1, grade 1 junior warrant officer, and went to the 101st Flying Blackhawks for a medevac company.
What rank did you achieve in the Marines?
In the Marines, I was on the E6 list. So I was,
no kidding.
Yeah, I was, in the Marines, they centrally select E6s. In the Army, they don't start that till E7, but in the Marines, they do E6. So I was on the list, but I hadn't pinned on by the time I went to the Army. So I went across as an E5, a sergeant, buck sergeant.
Hey, one of the greatest ranks. I'm wildly proud of that rank.
Yeah,
as
one of my
say,
favorite.
Sergeant of Marines.
Yeah, General McChrystal asked me what my favorite rank was, and that's what I said, the sergeant.
I was not on the in the zone for E6. They were happy to lease me out to the SEALs. Did the Marine Corps lay the foundation? Because I always talk when I talk to companies. I'm like, hey, they always want to hear about the SEALs. Special Operations is sexy. I get it, but I start by talking about the Marine Corps and how they laid the foundation. Because, and I'll give you my example. The reason I sort of reinforce it is I graduated high school with a 2.9. Mm-hmm. It wasn't from a lack of aptitude. Totally. If it didn't have to do with parties, girls, and fun, I just didn't care. But then, the Marine Corps sent me back to school on something called the MESEP program, and I graduated.
I remember.
It was like a 3.65. I assure you, I did not get smarter during my time in the Marine Corps. Yeah.
It's all about effort, right, and focus.
What made because I know what made the shift from the Marines to SOCOM, but what made you make the shift from the Marines to the Army?
I think it was, a combination of things. Part of it was maturing to the point where, I needed to quit screwing around here and start making something of my life. The clock was ticking, and, I needed to have some goals. And then this opportunity came up. Another guy had applied on Whidbey, another Marine, and he had a brochure that showed a Cobra helicopter hovering over the trees with the mist coming up, and I just remember that fateful moment. I said, hey, what is that? I was actually a bouncer in the Marine Corps enlisted club. We had our own club there at Marine Barracks, the Globe and Anchor Club. And he told me about it. So I started looking into it, started the process. Took a long time, but I went down to Fort Lewis and got my flight physicals, took the flight aptitude test, which was probably a 4-hour drive, back and forth. And I, understanding I needed to aspire for more was a critical component, but then this opportunity came up and it put me on a completely different trajectory than I would have ever anticipated moments before I saw that brochure.
Was it the fascination of the aircraft and flying? Because you hadn't flown prior to this. What was it that just grabbed you?
That's a good question. I would say what grabbed me at first was that awesome looking Cobra hovering over the trees, and I was like, I want to do that. That looks really cool. And then I discovered, once I started, that I really enjoyed flying. I liked it, and so that put me on the path. And it was funny because I got to flight school, and my initial orders out of flight school were to Germany, to a place called Schwäbisch Hall. It was an assault company over there, Blackhawks. But I had heard about this secret unit at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and there was another guy in my class who was going to Fort Campbell, and he didn't want to go to Fort Campbell. And I didn't necessarily want to go to Fort Campbell either, but I wanted to be where that unit was because geography matters, right?
Yes.
So I swapped with that guy. And I went to Fort Campbell and immediately put in my application to go to the 160th. I got laughed out of the building. Don't even talk to us, till you get a lot more time.
Too green under the gills.
Kept going back.
Yeah.
So,
well, they also want to see that tenacity.
They do. Yeah. Well, I got selected for. So what I didn't realize as a warrant officer, because I didn't understand, right? A warrant officer, as you know now in your life, is very technically focused. The Army warrant officer pilots stay in the cockpit essentially their whole career. They may do some administrative jobs, but generally they fly. But they don't really get the opportunity to command with there's some exceptions to that, but they're relatively rare. And when I became a warrant, while I loved flying and was very focused on it, I also realized that, hey, I'm not going to be a commander. It's just not going to be in the cards as a warrant. And I was approaching that critical 10-year point where I had to if I was going to become a commissioned officer, I had to do it. Back then, the rule was you had to be able to serve 10 years of commission time by 20 years to be able to retire as a commission guy. So I applied to OCS and graduated Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning with 9 years, 10 months, and 2 weeks. And I had applied to the 160th, and I was a week out for graduation. And I called them and said, hey, I did pretty well. I was at the top of my class. Would you guys give me a look? And they did. I was on my way to the 82nd to fly for the 82nd Airborne Division. And they gave me a shot, and I made it and stayed there all the way. It stayed in Special Ops all the way till I was a lieutenant colonel in 2005. That is amazing. Let me ask you this: because we often talk about leadership and culture, and I know that's those are two passions of yours. What was the culture shift like? And this is coming from a prior Marine SEAL. I love the Army. I've got nothing but great things. But what was that culture shift like between the Marine Corps and the Army? It was very different. My personal opinion is I think the real strength of the Marine Corps is their NCO Corps. I think they've got a very, very strong NCO Corps. And I benefited from that, being a part of that corps within the Corps, I guess. I'd say the discipline is much stricter in the Marine Corps than it is in the Army. There's also a completely different culture. In the Marine Corps, you don't say I'm a 1st Division Marine or a 2nd Division Marine or a 3rd Division Marine, right? Which are 3 primary divisions, and I know there's a reserve 4th Division there, but you don't identify yourself in that way. You're a Marine, period. In the Army, you align more with a community or with a division. You're in the 82nd, you're with 101st or 1st Cav or whatever. It's more division-centric. The other big difference I noticed is the Marine Corps does a much better job, in my personal opinion, of teaching their history. You're not going to find a Marine that doesn't know that 10 November 1775, Tun Tavern, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Captain Samuel Nicholas, first Commandant of the Marine Corps. I mean, I remember in boot camp they drilled history. So you really got a sense that you were continuing on that line of history, for the Marine Corps. The Army, in my opinion, could do a much better job of teaching history because the Army's got a great history. They've done great things, and
it's the U.S. Army. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And I mean, but they don't focus on it like the Marine Corps does. And I think to their own detriment. Again, this is my opinion. But if somebody if I'd ever been chief of staff of the Army, I would have put a push on history because you have a sense, I think it builds a sense of belonging, a sense of serving something greater than self. Hey, look, there's a lot of people that went before you that did great things. Here's your time to do something great and have that obligation to continue that high standard.
But what were the things you're like, oh, I love this part of the culture within the Army at first?
Within the Army? The Army, I think one of their big strengths is training. Mm-hmm. They're very focused on training, and they'll send you to schools. I mean, the Marine Corps, they wrung out every penny. I'll tell you a funny story. When I got to the 101st, I was a medevac pilot, right? And I had to go to this course down in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, a medical evacuation course for pilots. And, they gave me my TDY orders to go down there, and they had a rental car on there, a rental car authorization. And I was like, a rental car? Is that legal? Can we have a rental car? I mean, it was a legitimate question. I was like, Marine Corps would never give you a rental car, ever. That's not allowed, So sometimes I think the Marine Corps can be penny wise and pound foolish that way.
Yeah. Yes.
Again, all this is my own opinion, and I'm sure everybody's got different ones. But the Army, I think, invests more in training like that.
Well, the Army, and I didn't know this until a few years ago, provides more scholarships than any other organization in the U.S. And I think that points to it. But to reiterate your point, and I'm not, denigrating the Marine Corps here, is what forced me to make that shift was I was a recon Marine, and we get around the SEALs in the Green Berets, and they're carrying around M4s with suppressors, and I've got the M16A2. And I'm like, and I'm a sniper, and I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. And there was, we weren't part of SOCOM when I did the switch. Now they have, and I'm so excited for that they got the Raiders, the MARSOC, and those guys are awesome. But at the time, the war had just kicked off, and it made sense to make that leap to SOCOM because, as per the AQX order, SOCOM had the lead in the fight, and if they were going to be the front, and I don't care what unit it was with. It just was the easiest from the Marine Corps to the Navy. I would if they said Army and you got to wear a pink tutu to get to the front, I would have worn a pink tutu. With bells on. So I
would like to have seen the whole pink tutu thing. So send pictures if that.
I will. Occurs. Being very fictitious there. So the TF-160th one. I mean, I talk about these guys as if they're on a pedestal. I served my country. I did I did my part. I feel like I did very little compared to a lot of guys, but just working with the TF-160th, the Night Stalkers, in the history of that unit, tell the listeners a little about that, because I mean, during the global war on terror, I think we always heard that you guys had the highest operational tempo.
Oh, by far. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that part of that is just the fact that it's aviation, right? It's so expensive, you'll never have enough.
And there's so few of you as well.
Right, yeah. And so, you can't get directly assigned as an aviator into the 160th, right? You have to apply, get selected, go through selection, and then the training pipeline to make the cut. And then you're on it's a 2-year after that, it's a long journey to become a fully mission qualified aviator, and then eventually a few of them make flight lead. So it's a very long process. And, the thing I learned early on in my tenure in the 160th was they are 100% customer focused. In fact, I'll never forget this captain. I was a second lieutenant running around, and they said, hey, number one priority for us is our customer. And we don't care if that's a Navy SEAL, a Green Beret, a Army Ranger, one of our classified special mission units. We don't care. They're all critical to us, and that's why we exist. And I know that, Marine Corps Aviation is very focused on supporting their, the Marine Air Wings, supporting their divisions and their Marines on the ground. But the Army is 100% focused on that. I mean, if you just look at the way they're organized, in the largest tactical formation of aviation in the Army is aviation brigade, which is subordinate to an Army maneuver division. Mm-hmm. And the 160th takes that to the next level. I used to tell, whether it was SEALs or SMU operators or Rangers or Green Berets or Raiders or whatever, I said, if we put you in, we're coming to get you out. I mean, we're never going to leave you, ever. And you look at Somalia, I mean, guys landing in the street, Carl Meyer, a dear friend of mine, 2 wounded operators in the middle of the street. They land in, one of the pilots, land in an intersection in a Little Bird. One of the guys runs out, Keith Jones, drags 2 of them into the back of the aircraft, shooting his pistol, killing enemy. His slide was to the rear on his M9 when he, picked each guy up. And that was just indicative. I wasn't in Somalia proper. I ended up picking Mike Durant up when he was on his way back. But I've often told people that my proudest day of being a Night Stalker was when I understood how they performed that day, those that were there. I mean, we never let the ground force down.
And I've seen this in action. And I mean, we put you guys in some tough situations. I mean, the ground and the enemy dictated those situations. But you're not joking. You guys would always get us out. I mean, the fact that you guys, and I think it speaks to like the empathy that you guys have, because, and I've heard you talk about this before. I mean, a good majority or a good portion of the 168th pilots were prior SEALs.
Special Operations SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, a lot of Rangers, some Raiders. We have Marines aviators from, swap over, because we had an exchange program. We always had a Marine flying AH-6s. I think they still do. And several of those, ended up leaving the Marine Corps and coming back in the Army as warrant officers and flying for that same company. So when I was there were at least 3 of them when I was there.
And that's not uncommon for the Marines that serve at the classified special mission units eventually make that leap, because they're like,
why not? I mean, you got the resources, you got the focus, the whole culture, everything. Yeah.
So, and I know you've talked about Somalia and the Black Hawk Down scenario. I think most people recognize that story. You had, those were most of your guys. You had been at the unit, and then you went on a exchange tour with the Air Force, right?
Yeah, I was flying with the Air Force at the time. Cliff Walcott, who was killed, Donovan Briley, Ray Frank, Bill Cleveland, Foy Fields. I served with all those guys. My middle son is Mitchell Walcott Hutmacher, and Cliff was in Super 6-1, was killed. I promoted I went to his son Robert's graduation from Norwich. He graduated with honors, was an Army aviator, flew Black Hawks. I promoted him to captain. Yeah, he's since left the service. I've stayed in touch with his widow, Chris, who's now happily remarried and living in, I think, North Dakota on a horse ranch. She loves horses. So it was absolutely, and we were in Panama together during Just Cause. We'd been in Desert Storm together. I flew off Cliff's wing. Mike Durant was part of all that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was definitely a brotherhood, and I was very, I had went on, my time was up. I was a platoon leader for a long time, but then I was flying with the Air Force. And the funny thing was, I was at Fort Bragg with the Air Force Squadron, the 55th that I was flying with, and we were doing some rehearsals for Haiti, because you remember Haiti was going on when all that happened.
I do.
And Cedras had sort of seized control. Well, I ran into Cliff Walcott, Donovan Briley, Mike Durant, several others, friends of mine from my platoon that were at Bragg at the same time, and they were heading to Mogadishu. They had just done a bunch of workups and were flying out that week. In fact, we ran across at each other on one of the ranges out at Fort Bragg.
I saw recently that the Army has a good track record of going back and, I don't want to say correcting history, but recognizing people that should have been recognized. They just awarded like something like something like 20 Silver Stars and Distinguished Service Crosses.
They upgraded a bunch of awards. There was a few 160th that got their awards upgraded, I think mainly crew chiefs. Mm-hmm. But the rest, some Distinguished Service Crosses, which, in the Navy side is equivalent to the Navy Cross. Bill Thetford, former SOCOM
awesome
and
dude.
CENTCOM. Awesome guy, Command Sergeant Major, great guy. He got his upgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross.
Over 20 years late, but it got done.
Scotty Miller's award got upgraded.
That's great.
I had lunch with him a few weeks ago.
General Scott Miller. For the listeners, and I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, But I've met a lot of people who I read about who I hold in high regards, and they are mentors. It's like mentorship through readership.
Yes.
Even though I don't meet them, but people speak volumes of Scott Miller.
He's an exceptional leader. I was with him on 9/11 with a guy you may know, Homer Nearpass was with me.
No kidding. It speaks to some of the greatest leaders I met in the military came out of the Army. You're talking about the McChrystals of the world. Of course, McRaven, General Miller, General Thomas.
Yep, General Tony Thomas, General John Campbell. I have a lot of respect. My two, probably the top that I really enjoyed working for Admiral McRaven and Stan McChrystal. Stan McChrystal spoke at our foundation's gala week before last. Just tremendous mentors to me later in life. General Thomas, I was his J3 at SOCOM, and now he's the chairman of the Special Ops Warrior Foundation, so I'm still reporting to him. And but they really made me a better person. I am fortunate and very thankful for having
iron sharpens iron. I'm pissed I missed the gala. I made it out for the ambassador's night.
You did.
And I felt like, when we arrived, I brought my wife. I thought there was going to be other people, I say at my level, and it was Admiral McRaven and General Thomas and you. And I'm like, wow. I'm in the wrong room. But, I had the pleasure of meeting Sean Corrigan.
Great guy.
Dude.
Unbelievable guy.
How tall is he?
Not tall.
No, not tall.
I don't know how tall is, but he's not tall.
But he
runs 10K a day, twice a day, every day. Still.
Hey, dude, I'm respectful to everyone and kind. There's no reason not to know, and I know you are too. But this is a cautionary tale of treat everyone with respect. Because as Sean started to talk, I'd known who Sean Corrigan was in his story, and I don't want to give his story, but I think the majority of the night, my wife and I just sat there because I kept, and what about this? And what about this? And he was telling his stories.
Served a year in Yemen, in Sana'a. He's been all over the world. I've known him we served together as captains and majors back in 96, 97, and we've been friends ever since.
When we left, because my wife, it's all Spanish to her. We married after the military, but I looked at her and I'm like, you were just in the room with some of the most just prolific leaders during the global war on terror. And I'm like, that Sean guy, I'm like, you have no clue. Don't take his kindness for weakness. He just badass.
I am fortunate to have the opportunity to continue serving with him. Couldn't be happier.
I think that speaks volumes to, and I want to ask one question about Somalia, but before we do that, Hollywood paints military leaders in a certain, they've got to sell movies.
Yeah.
But once people get to meet guys like Sean and you, they're like, oh my God, these guys are the most empathetic, kind, respectful, direct leaders you'll ever meet. I credit my time in the military for making me the man I am, as well as my parents.
Same here.
But
100%.
They really, once you really meet a military leader of your, your level and your fabric and what you've done, it redefines what people think about the military. And sometimes we need to advertise that more.
Well, it certainly made me into a better person. Yeah. I don't think I'd be sitting across. I'm almost positive we wouldn't be having this conversation if I hadn't served and grown as a person through my service.
So before we take the mid-roll break, I do want to ask about Somalia, because you had left the unit.
Right.
They deploy, and that goes down, and you lose a lot of friends. And I've seen this, and the reason I ask is it almost hits the guys who weren't there harder, because they feel like I should have been there. And my answer is well, dude, if you were there, you may have perished as well. Yeah. What were the feelings you had when they broke the news to you that this happened? One, you didn't know names at the time, probably.
No, I had been out actually in Yuma at the Marine Corps Fighter Weapons School, WTI, Weapons and Tactics instructor course out there. And I saw that there was a big event in Somalia. But I wasn't going to call the unit. I wasn't going to be that guy. Right? Yeah. They're busy caring for families. They have a bunch of casualties. They don't need a rubbernecker like me in there trying to. But Mike Durant's wife called me Sunday morning, October 4th, and she said, Mike's missing. Because there was a short period of time, maybe 6 hours or so, where everybody was gone from Mike's crash site in Super 6-4. And I thought he was dead. I mean, I really did. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to go up and make sure that I'm there for his family. Fully, again, I thought for sure he was gone. I called my squadron commander, my Air Force squadron commander, and said, hey, this is what happened. I'd like to take some leave and go up and be with his family. And I also called the regimental commander, then Colonel Doug Brown, who ended up being the SOCOM commander, is still a great mentor of mine. And I said, is it okay? I mean, Lori has asked me, Mike's wife has asked me to come up. Is it okay if I come up? And he said, absolutely. Yeah. And
absolutely, and thank you.
Yeah. And so I stayed there at his house, and when for the whole time, but when I landed up in Nashville, still didn't know anything, and I got up there, rented a car, drove up there. Keep in mind, I'm a captain, so this is a huge expenditure for me, like buying a plane ticket at the last minute and a rental car. I was like, oh, I'm going to eat macaroni and cheese for a month for this, And that's when I learned he was still alive. The video came out with him with his, leaning up against that wall with his broken back. And then it became just a different thing. All the others' wives that, I had served with, their husbands that were still over there were with me. They were with Lori Durant, and, it was a very interesting experience dealing. I didn't deal with the press. I didn't want anything to do with them. To me, the mission was getting Mike home, not, doing interviews or whatever, but they are a force to be reckoned with. That's for sure.
Oh,
I mean, they were
the unsung heroes in the military, as I say.
Oh, it was so. Was I regretful that I wasn't there? Yeah, I mean, I'm regretful every time I miss an op. I mean, everybody is, but because that's why we're in it. We're in it to win it. But I was also, like I'd said earlier, very proud. I mean, especially when I started getting more details about how many missions and how many, 18 hours in the cockpit flying. Guys getting their airplanes shot to pieces, landing them with the landing gear splayed out underneath them, hopping in the spare and going right back into the fight. I mean, just what you would expect from
of an American fighter, man. Yeah.
That's right.
Wait, what do you say to Lori when she calls? Because she's calling for reassurance.
Oh, yeah.
But in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, he's probably gone.
Yeah, I did. All I said to her was, hey, let me check with my boss, and I'll be up there. She said that would be great.
But you didn't feed her a false line like, hey, it's going to be okay?
No, I did. I mean, I don't think I did. That was a long time ago. But no, I just felt like, I guess what ran through my mind is, I know that if this is if the situation was reversed, Mike would have done that for me. And we are extremely close friends. We have been. He's on the board of the Special Ops Warrior Foundation.
Yes.
And he's running for U.S. Senate in Alabama right now. But he's done very well with his life. But to me, that's part of this community, right? Is we're always there for each other. And I feel that same commitment, I mean, clearly I'm very tightly associated with the 160th, but also to people, that I've served with in the SEAL community and the SF community and the Rangers. There's a young Ranger that we were on an op June 11th, 2003 called Operation Reindeer. Sergeant Matt Waters, we hit a terrorist camp. I mean, this was like the kind of stuff dreams were made of. There's 100 bad guys in there. They were all getting ready to go out on suicide
Some people call those nightmares, just by the way.
Yeah, it's true. But, to us, this is like, I've been waiting my whole life for this gig, Anyway, he took an RPG below the knee. We medevaced him out. I've always stayed in touch with him. He's a police officer for a university now. He was a Tacoma police officer right after that. He was a second Ranger Battalion guy out of Fort
275.
Lewis. 275. And, I mean, I'm completely committed to him and always have been. And we stay in touch, and whenever our paths cross, every year or so, and he knows that I'm always there if he needs anything. And that, to me, is part of that brotherhood.
The selfless valor we got to watch on a nightly basis, I was in awe of the guys we served with. Before we go to the mid-roll break, we always ask 2 hard questions. One, what is the biggest regret you've had in your career thus far, or life?
It's a negative and a positive.
Yeah.
The biggest regret is that I wasn't more involved in my sons' lives. Right? I mean, my youngest was born August 21st, 2001. September 11th, I was over in Budapest on an exercise. And of course, that changed everything. I found myself in Afghanistan a couple months after that, and then in Iraq, and that just kept up. And so I was absent. Fortunate for me, I married a former Air Force officer that I met when I was flying down in Hurlburt, but she raised our kids, and she did a great job. But I wasn't there for her. I wasn't there for our kids. The fact that they're all successful and that we have a great marriage is due to my wife, not due to me. I was completely focused on being in the fight. And so I do have regrets for that. But I would also say that if I hadn't done that, if I had bailed, I would have regrets over that too. So that is my biggest regret, that I wish I would have had more of an influence on my kid's life growing up.
The military during the GWOT suffered such a high operational tempo. I don't want to say brutal. Especially special operations. Brutal. I didn't handle that well. I ended in divorce, which is, I consider one of the biggest failures of my life. No one wants to say they got divorced. And I wasn't there. I missed my daughter's birth. Yeah. And I deployed 1 month after my son was born.
Same here.
Same
here.
There's I don't want to say guilt. Maybe it is guilt, but I still struggle with that one. What's the hardest decision you've had to make in your life? It is a stumper.
It is. So the hardest, and it won't seem hard to anybody else, and it's, I don't know if it rises to the level of what you're looking for, but I had been in the 160th for a long time. Then I went down and flew with the Air Force, and I had an opportunity to try out for a special mission unit. And I came under a pretty significant amount, and I got an approval from my chain of command to try out for it. But then the chain of command swapped out in the interim, and the new boss was not big on me doing that. He wanted me to come back to the 160th. But I'd made a commitment. I'd been training for it, and basically it was put out to me, you better be successful, because if you're not, you're never coming back. And I was a captain. I was a nobody. But I was like, hey, I made a commitment. I'm doing it. Come hell or high water. And that was a hard one, because I knew this ain't catch and release. I'm in it to win it for sure.
You got to ask if that was that statement from him was necessary.
We're friends, and we certainly got past that. And I don't know what manning challenges he had, and it was really a backhanded compliment, right? He wanted me back in the regiment, and I probably didn't appreciate that at the time, but it was really one of those. And there was a lot of mentors telling me I was making a huge mistake. But to me, I knew that was going to be a difficult path. It was hard to get in, make it through the selection process, and that's exactly why I wanted to do it.
It's amazing how they applaud you now. Like, oh, you made all the right calls, even though they were dissenters.
Yeah, people, hindsight's 20/20, I guess.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. And we're back with Major General Clay Hutmacher. So for the last half of this podcast, I definitely want to talk about leadership. And as we talk about it for the listeners, hey, everything we're talking about applies to you individually, to how you run your companies, your families, whatever profession you do. But, we in the break, we're talking about one of my former mentors, a guy named Chris Fussell, who was a protege of General Stanley McChrystal.
Yep, still works for them to this day.
Yeah, he's the president. Yeah. In an email when I left his command, he wrote, Mike, I need you to realize that leadership is such a vague art. and requires constant reassessment. And he went on to say that, hey, don't think you ever have it figured out. Environments, variables change, just keep evolving. And during the break, you said, hey, it changes with every scale as you step up, leadership position. Across the spectrum of billets you held from sergeant all the way to Major General, what was the biggest leadership challenges or the most difficult position you think you held? Or is it just, maybe even comparing them is not the right thing?
Well, I would say that every level of leadership that I had, significant challenges. Some later in life, when I was in more senior leadership positions, had more impact on, a greater number of people. I had a pretty significant issue I had to deal with as a 1st Battalion commander of 160th, 1st to 160th commander, that involved some lack of discipline on the parts of some leaders, which I was pretty draconian on. Some aircraft damage and lack of discipline on maintenance procedures and things like that.
So you actually talked about that because we were on the Jedburgh podcast. Right, basically, there was some holes on the bottom of the aircraft. But in what year is this?
This was in 2006.
So the guys are already worn over. The guys have been deploying.
And that was part of that, in my mind, that was a contributing factor to this failure. You're in combat. A lot of I won't say the rules don't apply, but you're more focused on combat. And I think some things get, subordinated to getting the mission done, which is, in the macro level is probably right, but there's a negative part of that. And I had just taken over 1st Battalion. So this must have been in June of 2006. And we had flown an aircraft down to one of our sister battalions for what we call a phase inspection, a major overhaul of the aircraft. And the battalion commander down there called me and said, hey, they do an inspection on the aircraft before they induct it into this overhaul program. And they call it a pre-phase inspection, and they crawl all over it because they want to make sure they know everything that's wrong with it so they can fix it. So when it comes out the other end, it's fully mission capable. And he said, our guys were looking underneath this aircraft, and there's like big holes in the bottom of it, which is unheard of. And so I was taken aback by that and professionally embarrassed by that. And I sent an officer over to do what we call an informal commander's inquiry. And to look at, okay, do we have a systemic problem, or was this just a one-off, a single failure or something? And it came back that, hey, they're not doing the basics. They're not doing the block and tackling, and they're not pre-flighting appropriately. They're not doing their daily maintenance checks appropriately. And to me, I've come to believe this over the years, that an accident is not a single event. An accident is a chain of events, right? And you know this. And I saw these as two significant links in that chain. I've got discipline failure on the part of leaders and on the troops doing the actual maintenance. And so I asked my boss, the regimental commander, if I could have jurisdiction over this, so that I could handle it at my level. 2, that if I needed to fire someone, that I had his authority to fire whoever I needed to fire. And he gave me both of those very graciously, and it really defined my command tour. So this company was, 150 people or so. And every leader that was directly accountable, from the company commander to not the operations officer, but the instructor pilots, on the warrant officer side, the platoon leaders on the commission side, the platoon sergeants on the NCO side, I called them all in and gave them all a letter of reprimand, every single one of them.
And how many days are you into your command when you do this?
I started it maybe a week and a half into command, if that. It was right away.
So within a week and a half, you're issuing letters of reprimand to all your people.
Correct.
Well, this significant
this company. Yeah. I had 6 companies, but this company. And I called them in, I read them the letter, and I said, this is a failure and you're responsible. And if you don't want to work in here anymore, let me know. If you're not going to conform to the standard and you're not going to uphold the standard, I don't want you here. And I gave him the opportunity. And eventually, a couple of the NCOs ended up getting reassigned, but not immediately. And at the time, I mean, that was a pretty draconian move. And it sent shockwaves through the rest of the formation. You know, I mean, Hutmacher ain't playing. And I said, hey, we're all about self-discipline here. We're all about doing the right thing when no one's looking and upholding the standards. Like, you know, people used to give me a hard time. They say, why are you so focused on haircuts? I said, I don't give a damn about hair, okay? I don't care if you pierce your tongue. Frankly, I don't care. I'm not going to do it, but I don't care. I care about standards. If the standard is that you have a haircut, that's the standard. If the standard is tomorrow you can grow a beard, pierce your ears, do whatever, that's fine with me. I don't care. But we're a standards-based organization, and that was what offended me about our failure in maintenance. Because not only are you putting the lives of your fellow soldiers in that company at risk, but we're putting all the customers that we support at risk. We're flying right on the edge every night. We don't need to be shooting ourselves in the foot by not doing
self-inflicted wounds.
Correct.
Sense,
we're not doing our established maintenance procedures to keep this aircraft safe and airworthy. And, you know, I didn't want to do that at the time. And I was, you know, disappointed that I had to start my command tour that way at the time. But now when I look in the rearview mirror, it was the best thing that could have happened.
I've got so many questions off this. Because, I mean, what were the outcomes if you didn't do it? Potential outcomes.
It could have been on the catastrophic side of that. I mean, there's several potential outcomes, but we could have lost an aircraft full of people and killed a bunch of people, an extortion 1-7-like event.
Yeah. Yes.
We could have, you know, in any lesser degree of that. But, you know, it set the tone for my command tour that the emphasis that I mean, it was tangible evidence of where I stood on standards. And I think I was worried coming into command of chronic fatigue. We've been in the fight for a long time. The 160th had lost a lot of people. And I was afraid that we were going to start having a rash of accidents from chronic fatigue. And this ended up really being, I think, this point where I was able to refocus the team. You know, that, hey, we're not going to tolerate a lack of self-discipline. I mean, this is not a job for life. You got to earn the right to be here every single day.
God, if everyone believed that.
If you don't want to be here, hey, the Army needs good sticks. You guys got a lot of good experience. You'll be the top dog and you'll be the ace of the base in your next unit, but you ain't doing it here. If you can't do the right thing and do the little things right and uphold the standards that has made this regiment great, then I don't want you here.
How long did you dwell on that decision? I know it wasn't long, but I mean, did you say, hey, I need to go home and think about this?
No, I'd say I did close my door in my office and put my feet up on my still new desk with my little cardboard box of my Love Me stuff sitting in the corner and thought about it for a couple hours. I called in some folks that I trusted in the unit to get their opinion. I'm a sort of an inclusive decision maker like that. And then I walked down the hall to my boss and closed the door with him and said, hey, this is what happened. This is what I wanted. This is how I'd like to handle it. And frankly, I didn't fully appreciate him giving me the jurisdiction over that. Delegating that to me was not common. And he's still a very close friend of mine, and I'm very appreciative that he gave me that opportunity because I wanted to be the lead chess plate on that. I wanted to be the guy whose face was on that discipline. I didn't want it to be the regimental commander. I wanted it to be me. It was my formation.
Yeah. You wanted to own it.
Exactly.
Especially in front of your
right.
young
I
leaders.
owned it. Yeah. And I've done that. You know, I'm a big believer in accepting responsibility for your actions. I mean, when I'd have to, you know, I'd have some sort of violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I'd call the soldier in and I'd say, okay, here's the deal. You got a lawyer. You've been afforded a chance to talk to a lawyer, right? Yep. Okay. I'm not telling you what to say. What I'm going to tell you is this. If you in fact did this and you are responsible, things will go better for you if you accept responsibility for your action. You know, not saying you're getting a pass, you're still accountable, but take it from me. If you accept responsibility and you step up, things will be better for you than if you do the old, he did it, she did it, and avoid responsibility. But you do what you think is right. And then I'd dismiss them, and then we'd start the official proceedings.
There seems like a total lack of of accountability in today's day and age.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to paint you one direction, but there, amongst our national leaders who we expect to set the example, there's not much accountability.
Yeah, I always, to be candid with you, I always hesitate to critique others because I don't have all the information. A lot of time there's a lot of nuances or facts present. But my personal ethos is accepting responsibility. I believe that's critical. And when you do something wrong, you own it. And, I think, and I've had to do it where, I had some crew members accidentally shoot an Afghan sheep herder outside of Jalalabad. And we were culpable, and I called my boss and I said, hey, I own this. I was sitting at Fort Campbell when it happened. I wasn't in Jalalabad, but still it's my formation. Commander's accountable for everything your unit does or fails to do. And the ironic thing is when I see a leader that wraps himself in glory all the time, sometimes at his peers' expense, and I call it the overuse of the vertical pronoun, I. That's a red flag to me. I did this and I did that. In my mind, if we're successful as an organization, it's they.
Yeah.
You always push the credit down to your subordinates. If your unit fails, then it's it's me. And I tell guys,
it's a burden of leadership.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. As a commander of an organization, whether that's a platoon or a platoon sergeant or whatever, you automatically get credit when they do well. Yeah. Automatically.
Yes.
And when you start trying to take all the credit for it and you use that vertical pronoun, I, me, all it does is detract from that. You're really defeating what I assume you're trying to accomplish, which is to propel yourself to the next level or you get some sort of recognition. But all you do really is stifle that.
People see it.
People see it. That's a red flag for me.
We even had leaders that used their name in third person. Yeah. It's usually, so that decision early on into your command order, I know I often talk about, there's two types of decisions, the right decisions and the best decision. And best is usually to gain popularity. You must have been wildly unpopular for a few weeks. Did there grumblings? Because the boys will talk.
Yeah.
Did anyone come back to you and say, hey, sir, I want to thank you for actually holding us accountable on that one? You're right.
Much later. In fact, one of the officers that I gave a letter of reprimand to is the current regimental commander of the 160th. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
He was one of the officers, and he was crestfallen. And, the chances are it may not have been his platoon. He may have been doing everything right. Mm-hmm. But in his particular section, I can't remember. I'm sure he was probably a platoon leader then. Platoon leaders are 03s, captains. But, I did get feedback later. Like you took us off that trajectory of failure and put us back. I don't know. Really, ultimately, I issued the marching orders. You can. I told each one of them. I said, you can be a zealot or a martyr.
Yeah.
I can accommodate either option. I'd prefer you're a zealot, but if you want to be a martyr, I'm your guy.
Yeah. Well, it's so different. People are so good about accountability with kids. They are. You see your kid do something wrong. I believe, the highest form of compassion is accountability.
Yeah.
And you want them to become good, outstanding, humans that contribute to society. So you hold them accountable. It's the only way they learn. But man, that must have been a rough decision early on.
It was not the way I had intended on start my command tour.
Let me ask you this. I'm always fascinated. Who's the one soldier, either past, present, or beyond, meaning no longer with us, that when you think of them, you just think of the prototypical soldier or leader that you were just always in admiration of? And when I say that, we all know no one's perfect. We all have our.
Yeah. I really, I had a lot of time for Cliff Walcott. He was our flight lead. I flew his wing. We fielded the DAP, the direct action penetrator, the ARM 60, which there's 15 of them in the Army. They all reside in the 160. I happened to be the first platoon leader of that organization when we stood up. And Cliff was the lead guy on that. He was in our R&D section and then moved back over into the platoon. And, I thought the world of the guy. And I thought he was professional. He was a warrior. And it crushed me when he was killed in Somalia. And that's why my middle son is Mitchell Walcott Hutmacher, right? So, when I look at a professional soldier, an aviator, a selfless servant, and he's the guy that taught me about that customer focus. A big part of it was Cliff Walcott. Like, hey, if this is what the customer needs, this is what we're going to do.
Was he a loud guy? Was he?
No. I'd say he was. I don't know. He wasn't an exceptionally loud guy. He had a similar background to me. He was an enlisted military policeman. So was his wife, Chris. That's when they met. He flew Cobras in an attack battalion, and then swapped over and was flying 60s, and then ended up in the DAP later. He was. I think he was, I wouldn't call him the epitome of the quiet professional, but he was, Tony Thomas would say the finest pilot he ever flew with was Cliff Walcott.
No kidding.
Yeah, when he was, a troop commander back in the day. And he was an exceptional flight lead. He was all business, and he was completely focused on the mission.
I said it when I asked you that question, we all have weaknesses. And I think the highest form of self-reflection is the ability to say, hey, I'm not good at this, or I still need to work at this. 40 plus years of service, Major General, most of that in Special Operations. Even to this day, what is the one thing that you struggle with personally?
Patience. Patience absolutely plagues me. I pray about it every morning, and he's yet to answer my prayers. I think I'm marginally better, but I struggle with patience. And I'll give you an example. So if I was going to propose some sort of change or new path or something, or reorganization or whatever, I'll go through before I throw that on the table in front of my staff and my subordinate commanders or my bosses or whatever it is. It's like a Rubik's Cube, right? I turn it all different ways and look at it from different angles and, play the devil's advocate. And before I go forward, I have to be, before I really articulate it or present it as an option going forward or a directive, I've sort of thought through this. I don't, make this. I don't do it.
Half-baked ideas,
no. Yeah. So I just remember sitting in these meetings, and people would, I always encouraged very candid feedback, right? Because, and even if it meant that it was a bad idea, and there's been occasion where something that I thought was good, somebody brought up some consideration that I hadn't thought of. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. We don't need to do that because of this or whatever. But if somebody brought up, well, what about this? And it was something I already thought of, I'd be like, no, I already thought of that. Let's go next. Like this is good. What I failed to appreciate at the time is you need to let them work through that. You need to let them look at it like you looked at it and be patient, because then they have buy-in and they feel like what they're saying has value. When I'm just dismissive of it, and I'm not dismissive of the individual, I'm dismissive because I've already thought through it and I don't think this is a problem. But it's important that they come to that same point without me just cutting them off. And I struggled with that. And frankly, it's hard to get candid feedback from subordinates. There's very few bosses that want to hear that they're jacked up. And it was later in life when I really looked back on my command tours and what I should have done and could have done. And it was like, you know what, that was probably the biggest takeaway, is I needed to just let the process work. Let people war game it and argue and just step back and let that process, because ultimately you're going to have more buy-in, because people will salute you to your face and say, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep. Greatest idea ever. And then you walk out of the room and say, that dude's an asshat. I mean, he completely doesn't get it. They're never going to tell you that to your face. Right. So patience is what I struggle with.
I'd say a lot of people, high performers across the board struggle with that. I mean, and it is both a strength and a weakness.
It is. Greatest strength carries over to be your greatest weakness.
Oh yeah. Biggest vulnerability. Before we end this, I want to talk a little about the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Again, the way people ask me, what is it? I said, it's the organization that funds the education of the children of our fallen Special Operations warriors. And it does more than that.
Yeah, it does. And and the children of our Medal of Honor recipients as well. Yeah. Living and deceased, and not just SOF. So that, you captured the mission. We actually have two missions. We provide immediate financial support to severely wounded, ill, or injured Special Ops personnel. Severely means they're in a hospital, basically. And we send them a check. We send them an iPad so they can, especially during COVID, so they can communicate with their loved ones. But our primary effort, our main effort in military terms, is the education of the children of our fallen and our our Medal of Honor recipients. People think that's a college scholarship, and that's a big part, but not nearly all. Depending on the age of the kid, and the average age of our children to come into our program is around 7. But we pay preschool. We fund preschool up to $8,000 per year per child. We provide unlimited tutoring from K through 12, or K through really college graduation, unlimited tutoring. SAT prep, ACT prep, language, math, reading, science, you name it. It doesn't matter. A band. We got one of our Medal of Honor recipient kids is playing the oboe in band, and we're paying for tutoring. That's awesome. For him. Yeah.
Good for him.
We pay a private school tuition assistance for our kids, up to $5,000 per year per child. We pay for everything in college. We pay for their college visits, their college application fees, computers, printers. They get a whole packet, and we completely fund their education. And we don't, they don't have to go to a 4-year institution. Most of them do, about 85% do. But we have one young lady, Sarah Weiss, her dad was an Air Force special tactics guy. She's a firefighter in Pinehurst, North Carolina.
You're kidding me. She contacted me when I was in
really
in Mount Everest.
I just saw her. Yeah, Sarah. She's a firefighter, and she's now a firefighter instructor. She tried nursing; it didn't work out, and this is what she wants to do. She's passionate about it. She spoke to a group of folks we had in Pinehurst. We pay for study abroad. We really encourage internships, and we fund internships, especially if they have to relocate for an internship. We have a program for children with disabilities, which I'm extremely proud of, and we're committed to funding that at the same level as we do all of our other kids. And I've expanded the definition of disabilities to kids that are having significant behavioral or emotional issues, because you can clearly tie that back to the loss of one of their parents. And if they go to Harvard, it's covered. If they go to a community college or trade school, it's covered. We want them to, and it's a lifelong commitment for us. And it's, I was interviewing some education counselors the other day that are bringing them on. And one of our counselors said, when she was interviewed, said, this isn't a job for us. This is a calling. And I looked at her, we're, interviewing this person. And I said, I thought about it. I said, that's exactly it. I mean, I have the post 9/11 GI Bill. You have the post 9/11
Yes.
GI Bill. I gave it to one of my kids went to Duke, so he got it.
Good use.
Right. Yeah.
For
still not enough.
Not so cheap education. Yeah.
But the VA gives you a check, and there was no. That's an entitlement. It's a government entitlement that you earn through your service. This is so much more than that. I mean, the relationship that we have with those kids, Every kid that gets a 3.5 GPA every semester, I write them a personal note and congratulate them, or any other significant achievement, or a kid that's struggling. Our counselors are with their families through the whole journey. It really is it really is a calling, and I'm glad to be part of it and honored to be part of it.
When I was telling somebody about the foundation, and they weren't trying to be cute.
Yeah.
They said, well, hey, don't those families get like a huge check when one of their service members die? And I told the story of Carrie Mills.
Yeah.
Yeah. She may have gotten a check, but Cash, her son, was 18 months old.
Right.
And that money does not make it to his college years, probably well short of his high school years.
Right. And they do get a VA entitlement for part of it. And we do use a little bit of that for our kids to qualify for it.
Oh, so do you help them with that process too?
We do. Well, that's almost all done by the military when they when their death occurs. That the casualty assistance officer takes care of that. But the fact is, there's so much more than that, and our commitment is an enduring commitment. When you were in the SEAL community, when I was in the 160th, we both lost people, right? And there's an intense focus put on those families when you lose them, for sure. We do meals on wheels. The wives would get together, they'd cook meals, bring them over there, take care of the family. It's an intense spotlight on that family. But after that memorial and that funeral, the unit's got a mission to do. You're back deploying. Yeah, that focus drops off. The Special Ops Warrior Foundation, that's just the beginning for us. And we're with them every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And you just got it, you've got all these things. Just think about it. You lost your husband or your wife. We have both. And all of a sudden there's financial impacts. There's, all these things. Your whole life changes, and giving them that peace of mind that we're going to be there for them. And they have a lot of things to worry about, but this isn't one of them.
Let me ask you this. So, General, 40 years, you could have started your own consulting firm. Yeah. Plenty of companies would have made you offers to be on the board, but you chose this. I mean, was that a discussion with the wife? I mean, what was the final decision to continue? I mean, you're still serving. You took the uniform off, but you're still serving.
Yeah, absolutely. So clearly I talked to my wife. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I talk to my wife about everything. So,
if you're listening, it's a two-person decision.
Yeah, that's self-critiquing if I don't. But when I retired, I was, I thought I'd be here talking to you about, convincing you that Talent War Group needs a helicopter or a plane or something for whatever company that I was working for. But when this came up and this opportunity presented itself, I mean, there was no hesitation. I mean, I'm like, wow, are you kidding me? I've seen firsthand what this organization does for our families in a way that the government will never be able to do, that the military will never be able to do, in spite of our best intentions. And I think SOF does it, I'm biased clearly, does it better than anybody else. I don't care what service you're in. But we are there for them every step of the way. And we proactively reach out to them, You don't have to apply for your scholarships. You have already earned the price of admission. You're already approved. You fill out a contact form one time, and that's it.
That's again, definition of service and making it easy for that. Well, Clay, we end on two questions, and we are going to drop the links to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, where they can find you, where they can donate. And what I would ask for the listeners is, if it's $5, $10, $25, whatever you can give, it is going to a good cause. I support very few foundations. This was the one that held on to my heartstrings, because again, I look at the Carrie Mills of the world and all the guys on Extortion 17.
Familiar with Extortion 17 for sure.
So, how will Clay Hutmacher evaluate whether he's lived a life of purpose and impact?
I would say that I have lived a life of, but I'm going to give some caveats. I have lived a life of purpose. I'm still living a life of purpose. I'm still serving a cause greater than self. but I'm still imperfect, and I still struggle with leadership every day. I fail routinely. I aspire to be better, and the struggle continues. I am committed to leadership. I love it. I'm passionate about it. I think it's not appreciated, especially as much out in the corporate world as I think it should be. And I mean, the evidence to me is blatant, but we can't quantify it, right? You don't have a 4-year degree in leadership or a master's in leadership. I think they're out there, but really, this is a learned skill.
Personally, I think starting in college is way too late.
Oh yeah,
there should be leadership curriculums in grammar school to teach it. Then former military leaders, again, who are empathetic, kind, respectful people. That
one of my favorite things to do is sit around and have informal discussions about leadership and sharing the mistakes that I've made and, how I made them and the events that led up to me making them is very satisfying for me, and companies ask me, would you do it? Yeah, I'll be happy to do it. Cover my travel, maybe make a donation to the foundation. To me, it's a labor of love and one that I still am very passionate about.
We just returned, Talent War Group had a leadership offsite amongst all our leaders. One 31-year sergeant major from the Special Forces community, Marine infantry captain, myself, Carly, who was in the Air Force. And it was just 2 days of just talking about leadership and our different philosophies and mistakes. God.
Yeah. The conversation is not really scripted. It goes where it goes.
I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
Those are the best retreats. In the business world, doesn't do that enough. I absolutely agree.
I agree.
What are those 1, 2, 3 keys to success, those tenets, those non-negotiables that you believe had on most occasions led to your success?
Number one has got to be integrity. I know that's a common one, but if your subordinates, your superiors don't trust you, you can't go anywhere from there. You've got to have that trust, and you got to earn it every day, and that's part of owning it and all of that. 2, humility. And I think, being humble, realizing that while you may have a significant role in an organization, it doesn't mean you're better than anybody else. In fact, it may mean that more is expected of you and you have more experience, but you're not better than anybody else. And the other one is, and maybe surprising to you a little, is consistency. I think, I'm not saying you prejudge, but you should be consistent. Your subordinates to sort of know what they're going to get. I've worked for leaders before where I go in with a catastrophic thing and say, man, this just happened. And they're like, oh, it's fine, Clay. We'll work through this. And then I come through with some nitnoid mouse turd and they lose their mind over it. And I'm like, hey, I want the other guy. Can we get the other guy in here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that puts people off. And I think you should be consistent on how you deal with people. And it doesn't mean that you lower the standard. But they should know what they're going to get. Those would be my 3.
I can't recall where I heard that, but somebody said leadership is consistency.
Absolutely,
it is consistency of what you preach. Consistency
it's
of your
hard
example.
To be consistent, right? I don't feel like being a selfless leader all the time.
Yeah. Well, Clay, I can't thank you enough for coming. I know for the listeners, every time I sit down with you, I learn a whole lot. I know we've got a dinner tonight.
Yes, sir.
In Austin to raise for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Scott Howell. General Howell is going to be the keynote speaker.
JSOC commander.
As well as Admiral McRaven.
Admiral McRaven will be there. Yep. Two great friends and mentors.
Well, again, thank you for joining us. And for all those listening, thank you for joining the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast. We'll see you again.